Let's look back at every offseason from Pacers president Kevin Pritchard and learn what he does his best work in, when he did it, and what it has all meant for the Pacers to get to this point. We'll do it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Monday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're going to do something that I wanted to do for a couple weeks this offseason. That's look back at every single offseason of the Kevin Pritchard era, move by move, not in too much detail, but a little bit under the microscope to really see what this era has looked like from his perspective, when it has and has not gone well, what we can learn from this exercise, and what it could mean for the Pacers going forward. Sorry for the delay on this one getting out. I was gone at my own bachelor party this weekend, and I was way too beat up to do this last night. So this is coming out about 12 hours late, but that's okay. It's going to be awesome. Someone down in New Orleans asked me what I do for work, why I live in Indiana. And I said, do some stuff with the Pacers. And they said, I love baseball. So that was very fun and stupid interaction. But now we're going to actually dive back into the Pacers and Kevin Pritchard off seasons. For some not necessary, but still relevant context, he got hired or promoted really into Bird's chair the summer before the Paul George trade in 2017. And Chad Buchanan got hired officially like 2 months technically after that. But the timing of official hires doesn't really matter in this context. There's like a draft that happened before some stuff was official, and the PG trade happened like the day after it came out, whatever. But for the context of this, that they are both key decision makers through this entire process that we're about to talk about. And that offseason's a fun place to start because obviously it was his first summer, and chronological is the only way to do this. But really, they got set up kind of well for an interesting summer, even though they had to do a really hard thing, right? Because the last summer of Bird in 2016, a lot happened that helped set them up, right? George Hill gets a big deal in Utah, gone. Solomon Hill, big deal in New Orleans, gone. Jan Mahinmi, big deal in Washington, gone, right? The Pacers added some smaller stuff, Aaron Brooks, Al Jefferson. Al Jefferson's contract was a little big, but they mostly refrained from going crazy with the big moves that summer, right? And that really helped them the following year, this one, when they had a lot of space and a lot of flexibility to kind of figure out how they were going to navigate from a good team to a star demanding a trade. That's a tricky spot because the pieces around PG were still in theory good players. Like, you want to make that good team work. You can't just strip it down all at once because of one guy, but it's hard line to navigate. And I was very critical of what they did in the Paul George trade at the time. Oladipo and Sabonis, that worked out amazing, right? That trade looks spectacular in retrospect. That wasn't their whole summer, right? They lost Lavoy Allen, Rakeem Christmas. They stretched Monte Ellis. They lost Niang. They lost Kevin Seraphin. All those guys were done in the NBA at the time. Niang eventually made it back via the Jazz. CJ Myles went to Toronto in a sign and trade. Jeff Teague signed a big deal into Minnesota. Obviously, Paul George was traded, and Aaron Brooks went also to Minnesota. So a lot of their guys were either out of the league in the next 1 or 2 years or immediately after that summer, right? They had a weird slate to start with, but they, beyond the PG trade, signed Bojan, signed Darren Collison, took into cap space via trade Corey Joseph. So that was their additions beyond Oladipo, Sabonis that were really significant. They also added Damian Wilkins to the back of their roster and Alex Poythress. Then they drafted Sumner, Edmund Sumner, Ike Anigbogu, and TJ Leaf. Bad draft, right? Full stop. We'll get into the draft part of this later. We'll get into a lot of stuff for themes later. But in general, you look back on that, like a lot of short deals. Corey Joseph was 2 years. Collison and Bojan were 2 years. Vic and Sabonis were longer, but they were part of a bigger trade. They clearly tried to find a little era of can we salvage the stuff we had? And a lot of people, including me, were very critical of that. It really worked. It really obviously worked out. They were really good. They almost won a playoff series that year, right? So a lot of those moves outside of the draft look really good in retrospect. They did this half rebuild, half retool kind of deal that a lot of people were confused about, but it really worked. And all those contracts ended up being good value. They did lose Bojan and Darren and Corey Joseph for nothing because they were good. They were trying to keep those guys and win games. And the Vic injury really kind of changed how they had to think about things the following year. But that all really worked out. They got a good pick in the late second round with Edmund Sumner. Sabonis turned out to be a franchise staple for a long time. Like, they did a pretty good job that summer in a really strange hand of like trying to build around the good stuff they had and having a decent draft pick, but also probably needing to rebuild. So interesting start to the KP era, which sets up their next summer, which was 2018, which was, oh, we're really good. Like, we can almost beat LeBron in the first round good. And Vic's young and Sabonis is young and Turner's young. And we still have Darren Collison and Bojan and some interesting young guys like Sumner ascending with this bench. And look at that. They had cap space because Al Jefferson gone. Trevor Booker gone. Lance goes to the Lakers. Joe Young gone. Glenn Robinson goes to the Pistons. Alex Poitras goes to the Hawks, right? All of a sudden, somehow, again, after being good, they had space, which this was a really interesting theme of the first 3 years of their era. Bird, by not signing these huge deals in 2016, they were always able to have space and flexibility early in their tenure. They use that word flexibility a lot. And I don't know Pritchard and Buchanan's history pre-Indiana very well, but I wonder how much influence like having all these options early in their tenure really mattered. And we'll get to that when we get to 2019 in a second. But remember what happened in the playoffs when they lost to LeBron. It went 7 games, but there were some games where Vic was double teamed and they could do nothing, right? They had no answers. Vic was somewhat responsible for that because he'd pick up his dribble too much, but they needed a second creator, very obviously. A Nate McMillan team needed a shooter, very obviously. And they needed a third big because clearly Sabonis was about to get promoted and they lost Al Jefferson. And so with their room exception and cap space, they did everything. They did everything everybody said, including me, they should do. Tyreek Evans, 1-year deal. Doug McDermott on his, 3-year deal. And Kyle O'Quinn. That was it. That was what everybody kind of hoped they would do that summer. And they did it and added, in theory, to a good team. They also drafted Aaron Holiday and Alize Johnson, 2 guys who did contribute for them. Aaron Holiday's still in the league. And brought in CJ Wilcox on a camp deal. It doesn't matter. They also extended Myles Turner that summer. Obviously, that turned out to be a great move. He was very underpaid, or slightly underpaid, maybe to be more accurate, because the cap was lower. Slightly underpaid on that deal. And obviously, that deal set up his current contract. Good summer, right? With the rubric they had. And yet, maybe one of the worst moves they made, although it wasn't that bad because the Tyreek Evans deal didn't work out, but it was only a 1-year deal. Hasn't played in the league since, obviously, but that's like what everybody thought they needed, right, on the team. It was very strange the way that sorted out because that looked so good at the time they actually did it. They're building off of a 48 win, I can't remember, 40 something high 40s win team. Vic hadn't gotten hurt yet, and they were great to start the next season. I think that's another part of this that is really tough to remember in retrospect because they got swept in the first round and all that. They won 48 games again, obviously, but with Vic getting hurt mid-season, it really kind of sours what that looked like. And Tyreek was actually okay, not good, but okay in the playoffs. But like that team started out awesome. I think they lost 5 or 6 of their first 17 games when we're really rolling, and then Vic was in and out. And they had a stretch. I don't know if people remember this in December before Vic got hurt to their first game of the new year, where they lost 2 out of 14. Right, like they were rolling in that season until Oladipo got hurt. They weren't like awesome. They clearly had some issues in general, but they were really good. And like, oh, maybe this team can win around, be better. And then the rug got pulled out from under them and they had to totally change directions. But like that summer is maybe one of their worst because their biggest move didn't work. But it was it's the opposite of 2017, right? The biggest move in 2017, everybody thought, what are you doing? And it worked out great. And their biggest move in 2018, everybody's like, that's perfect. And it didn't work out. And I always have this thought when looking back at this kind of stuff, and I talk to people about this, what do you grade a decision maker on? What the perception was at the move at the time or how it works out? It's a results business. The answer has to be how it works out, right? But it does matter to think about that, right? If you're going to go right now and say that Tyreek Evans signing was so stupid, he stunk for the team and the results were not good. Okay, like that's fine. But remember, everybody thought it was awesome. But you can then have to do the same thing with Oladipo where like you give him credit that it worked, but also like, what were you what? But in retrospect, they thought they had a better team than everybody else and they were right. So that sets up 2019, which definitely was their busiest summer, his busiest summer, whatever you want to say, where they had the very unique, kind of like the 76ers this summer, although they got Paul George, which was more significant, but a very unique spot where because Vic got hurt, they lost in the first round and their season ended really early, but their core was clearly very good, right? Depot, awesome. Sabonis, ascending star. He would become an all-star very soon after this. Turner's really good. But they have good bench guys, some okay young guys. Like, they're good. Their core is really solid. And a ton of room, a ton of cap space this summer because Bojan's a free agent, because Darren Collison's a free agent, because Tyreek Evans is a free agent, because Corey Joseph is a free agent, Wes Matthews is a free agent, Kyle Quinn's a free agent, Thad Young is a free agent. My God, everyone is a free agent, right? So they had all this room. They were good last year, but a lot of the reasons they were good were players whose names I just said. Do they want to keep those guys? What are they going to do? Who are they going to add a point guard? There was like Ricky Rubio was a really common name that year. For those of you who remember, like really common. I think that actually was pretty somewhat close to being a possibility, a reality. It did not happen. And for those of you who don't remember or weren't like really in the weeds with transactions 5 years ago, you should go back and try to find stories. I think Derek Kramer wrote one about this butterfly effect that happened because Nikola Mirotic decided to sign with Barcelona. That sounds crazy, but like now all of a sudden the Jazz are like, oh crap, what are we going to do? And so then they get Bojan, and like the Pacers probably wanted to keep Bojan. He was pretty good. He got a bunch of money, and then they had to pivot elsewhere with their newfound money. And Ricky Rubio gets all this bag from Phoenix that's now available. It's like all this stuff just snowballed, and it led to, instead of what the Pacers were thought to be doing, or many thought they would do, they got Brogdon. It's very splashy. One of their biggest free agent additions ever at the time. Former Rookie of the Year, really good player. And pre-Pacers, he had this really high perception because of his prior playoff performances. They got Jeremy Lamb after his best scoring season. They got TJ McConnell. They got TJ Warren and a good second rounder for nothing, right? Like they were killing it in terms of major additions. Drafted Goga, got Brian Bowen, who stuck around for 2 years. Signed TJ McConnell that summer. Obviously, that paid off really well. And then after some like really awkward, really one of the most awkward practices I've ever been to, they did agree to an extension with Sabonis, which mattered a really great deal because that was totally an undermarket deal. They got him on a steal in retrospect and kept Edmund Sumner. Awesome summer, right? Really chaotic environment to get to that point with the Rubio stuff and how they got there, but in a really odd reality where you have a ton of cap room, but you're good. But Victor's also hurt, so you have like minutes to offer free agents who are going to move to the bench eventually. Maybe I don't know how much that mattered with Jeremy Lamb, but he started like that whole time. That was a good summer, and I'm going to tell you why I think people think about that. Like the results didn't pan out well from that summer, but again, this goes back to the results versus perception at the time stuff in just a second, because injuries, rightly in some cases, but still, injuries ruined. Rightly is the wrong word, but whatever. Injuries ruined this era. I'm going to explain why in just a second. Before we talk about that, we have to very quickly talk about the good folks over at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about them. They are America's #1 sportsbook. Well, right now, we have something a little different for you because right now, through September 22nd, so you still have plenty of time, every FanDuel customer, you get on there, you bet $5, you'll get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV to watch NFL games. The Colts, if you're listening to this, maybe you're a fan of them. Fun, yet not the result people wanted. Start to the season. And if you get a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. How about that? All you need is a Google account, current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. And to get that offer going, FanDuel, $5 bet, 3-week free trial. Just visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. Check it out today. Watch football. Check out FanDuel. You will not regret it. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen should be Locked On Colts if you are a fan of Indiana sports teams. They obviously had their season opener. Zach and Jake will crush it. Have crushed it. I have not listened yet, but I'm going to. Breaking down Anthony Richardson's holy smokes passes and their defense's day to open the season against the Texans. I apologize for the worst lighting. I had a lamp on my desk. It fell on the floor and completely shattered. So we'll have to figure that out in the next few days. Let's keep rolling here through Pritchard off seasons. 2019. I mean, if you for those of you who remember, Adam and I were like, they got Brogdon. We were going crazy on this live reacting free agency show. Like, wow, this team's gonna be fun and good. And like, I thought that was. I literally wrote an article for Forbes calling him like the ideal target for them that summer, and they got him right. So they look really good on paper now. Brogdon, in theory, healthy. Brogdon, Depot, Warren, Sabonis, Turner starting 5, Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb, TJ McConnell off the bench. Wow, this team is going to be good. Edmund Sumner's in this mix, is this young ascending talent. Their third center is this young kid, Goga Batadze. did not pan out. And there are a lot of reasons that era did not pan out, and we'll go through them chronologically here in a second. But the top list item was injuries by a mile, right? Turner missed time like 15 to 20 games a season throughout that era. Brogdon missed a ton of time throughout that era. TJ Warren obviously had the one healthy season where he barely missed any games and then played 4 games total throughout the next 2 seasons. Jeremy Lamb tore his ACL. Vic was hurt and then got traded. Like, everything went wrong from an injury perspective for that team, right? In the 9 games, it only happened 9 times, which is a huge problem for this era. They had 9 games with Vic, Brogdon, Sabonis, Turner, and Warren all playing. First of all, that says everything about this offseason, that they had 9 total games where this happened, right? Vic came back in late January of that season, and then they had a spickle spatter of injuries along the way, and then the pandemic happened, and Sabonis missed all those games, and the next season started. They barely had any Warren. So through all of the years of this core, they had 9 games with the top guys. They went 6-3 in those games. It's not awesome, but like, it's pretty good. You'll win over 50 games with that win percentage over a season. They went 6-3. They had an offensive rating of 115.6, which I know the current Pacers have ruined our brains, but that was very good at the time. And a defensive rating, classic Nate McMillan, Dan Burke team, of 101.5. That is a small sample, but they were crazy good. Crazy good. It all made sense. It was a great summer on paper, and it didn't work out. Maybe there should have been injury red flags with Brogdon. In fact, there totally should have been injury red flags with Brogdon, right? He was hurt before coming to the Pacers. TJ Warren had not a great injury history either, right? He had only played his peak games pre-Pacers was 66. The 67 they got from him the first season they had him is still to this day the most games he's played in a season. Centers get hurt a lot. Turner is outside of last season typically like 10, 15, 20, whatever. Okay, so there should have been some signs of this, but like, it really snowballed. We talked about this a lot at the time. One guy would get hurt, and then another guy would have to play more or play in a role that he's not used to, or play a more physical role, and that would lead to him getting banged. It just kept going and going. It never stopped. They had to get out of that because, as everybody knows, they were the 4th seed in the bubble year. If they had Sabonis, who knows what that season ends up like. They got smoked by the Heat in the first round. They fired Nate McMillan. Everything changed because of how that season went in the bubble. And the bubble made every offseason for the next couple of years really crazy. Really, the pandemic in general. I don't want to call it just the bubble. But that is the hardest one for me to look back at and figure out. It's the 2019 summer, right? It's similar to 2018 where they did stuff that everybody said they should do, added a ton of valuable talent, and it didn't amount to like anything, right? That group was still together for a couple of years with Bjorkgren and partially Carlisle and didn't win, right? They didn't. So results say bad. At the time, it says good. It's just they did what everybody thought they should, and it didn't work. And there's a lot of reasons, but I think they've learned about how they consider injuries since then. They've had a lot more guys who play a lot in the time since. Valuable lesson learned, but that summer is really fascinating because it was super nuts. They made moves that everybody thought were great at the time, and it just didn't work out. And Depot's injury was the starting problem that like made the snowball go, but it just didn't amount to what everybody thought it would, including the team. They were the 4th seed. They were top. They would have had a home playoff series that year if there was no bubble, alas. And now this kicks off a weird cycle because they got swept. They fired their coach. They clearly have expectations. They like this team, but they just signed a bunch of guys in 2019 who all got big raises year over year. They also extended Sabonis, who got big raises, and Turner 2 years ago, he got big raises. Hey, this core looks good. They were the top 4 seed. Pandemic happens. The cap's going up 3%, and the pay is going up 8%. They did not have room to do anything. In fact, they had too much money. Too much money. Their 2020 summer was very strange. Part of why they fired their Nate McMillan, I almost said their coach, might have been that they had nothing else they could do. They lost Alize Johnson. They traded away TJ Leaf in a salary dump, and they lost Nazmi Trulong. That's it. They had Jalen McHugh on the team because of that Leaf trade. They drafted Cassius Stanley, and they kept Keelan Martin from Butler. That's it. They re-signed Justin Holiday, and there you go. You're ready to go. Like, that's all they could do. They couldn't afford anything else. Thankfully for them, Jakar Sampson took another minimum to be like their juicy 3rd center, 4th power forward kind of guy. That's all they could get. And they had to still salary dump to do that. And they needed to keep Justin Holiday. So it worked out that they found a salary dump trade, but they couldn't do anything else. They couldn't afford to do anything else. Very boring summer. Nothing to say. Really strange timing. And guess what? It didn't matter because the injuries kept coming and the Bjorkgren season went sideways for lots of reasons. And that is really the headlining move of this summer, is the coaching change. I was always more of a McMillan coach believer than everybody else, but I got why they made the change. It did not work, right? And this is the argument against coaching changes for all of time, is you never know what someone else will do. Maybe it'll go awesome. Lots of teams have had awesome coaching changes. Maybe it'll be like the Bucks just were last year, or the Pacers were the season that we're talking about right now, where it just is not, it's not good, right? Relationship problems. On court was not what it needed to be. Creativity stuff was cool. The way Nate Bjorkgren thinks about basketball is kind of how I think about it, but it was not a good coach. It didn't gel with the team. And that was their headlining move of that summer, was the coaching change. And they went under 500. They went from a 4th seed to under 500. Oof. That is a bad offseason, right? That is bad. And that is the first year where they had nothing they could do, where they were like, from a roster perspective, where you could say, the Pacers did not do very well that summer. How do they respond to it? Well, there wasn't really a lot they could do in 2021 either, but they were in a different spot. They weren't coming off of being a 4 seed. They were coming off of not making the playoffs at all. What did they do? What does this say about Pritchard and his front office? Let's get to I would call this the modern era. Modern is such a stupid word to use there, but the current era of Pacers basketball, the 2021 summer. Let's start from there and then finish up what we learned about Pritchard from looking back at these summers. Before we get to that, though, this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Kids, they're always learning. They're always growing. But when we get to adulthood, we lose that curiosity. What's something you'd like to learn? Maybe gardening? How about a new language? Or maybe how to finally beat your best friend in bowling. Let me tell you, I did not beat my friends in bowling this weekend. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back-to-school era can come at any age. And therapy can help with lots of stuff, like learning positive coping skills, learning how to set boundaries. It will empower you to be the best version of yourself. It is not just for people who have experienced major trauma or something to that effect. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch at any time for no additional charge. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen on this lovely Monday, your second listen. Not a lot going on in the NBA world these days. The Cavs signed former Pacer for a short time, Tristan Thompson. Check out Locked On Cavs for a very interesting team to me this summer. They have done almost nothing in terms of additions, just a coaching change. As we just talked about here, sometimes that's not enough. So they get to 2021 in this weird spot. They like their team. They know the coaching change sucked, but they got to do something. They're in the lottery. So they hire Rick Carlisle. He's still the coach. I think they're very happy with the decision they made there. They're still hoping to be good despite being in the lottery, because they like the core they had. They have a new head coach, but they can't afford everyone because the cap did not go up very much from COVID. And the league said, hey, we're going to limit the cap growth. So a really weird time. They're trying to blend winning because they need to be winning. They have this expensive-ish core with Sabonis and Turner and Brogdon and everybody, but they're also below 500 team, and they can't afford everybody. How do you blend winning with what you want to do there? This was a strange summer, very strange, because you're kind of trying to do two things at once, and I always hate that. You guys know, if you listen to this show, that is my least favorite thing teams do, is when they try to blend the long term, like get some young guys in the door, and the short term win now stuff. They literally started that in the draft. They drafted Chris Duarte to kind of play and fill in this Doug McDermott spot, and then they traded stuff to get Isaiah Jackson, who was clearly a project, right? So what this summer looked like, besides Carlisle, they extended Brogdon. That ended up working out, and they re-signed TJ McConnell. They lost Amita Brima off his two-way. They traded Aaron Holiday in the Isaiah Jackson trade. They could not afford to keep Doug McDermott at the number he was worth at the time. He went to the Spurs. They lost Jakar Sampson, who's not been back in the NBA. They lost Cassius Stanley, who was back with the Pistons for a hop and a skip. And they lost Edmund Sumner via a trade because they had to cut some salary to get a point guard back, right? They were in such a weird spot with their salaries at the time where, again, the cap growth was low. That really hurt them, right? And it's the opposite of what happened with Bird, where he didn't sign big deals. The Pacers signed good deals in 2019, but then the cap never went up a lot, but they had all these expensive guys. It was really tough timing from a roster perspective to have the way the pandemic shifted the cap. They had enough resources to add Torrey Craig, which that was something everybody thought they kind of needed, a defensive wing. They drafted Duarte, who for one season looked like a really great pick. Isaiah Jackson, who has been a totally fine selection at 22, still on the team. And then tried Brad Wanamaker. They added Dwayne Washington, who worked out for a year, I guess. The Brad Wanamaker signing, oof. So that summer was just weird, right? Their best player, like from the NBA, they added was Torrey Craig, and they lost actual value in McDermott, and they had to trade away stuff to get Isaiah Jackson. That trade was good. So that's just a weird summer, right? On the draft, they get a guy that want to contribute right away, and a long-term thing in Isaiah Jackson. They signed Torrey Craig and re-signed Brogdon and McConnell. That's great, but they're playing rookies in their rotation, right? It's just kind of weird. How are we going to figure this all out? Kind of young and good thing, and they stunk. They really stunk. Signing and hiring Rick Carlisle, clearly a sign they were trying to be good, and they were not good. They were just not good at all. They did the right thing mid-season. They made the decision probably like 7 months later than I think most people would have to just tear it down to the studs. But they did really well, obviously, with the Haliburton trade and the Nembhard eventual pick trade and all this stuff. Like, they got out of their situation extremely well. But really awkward first half of that season. It just did not work at all. But that just like the blending stuff is always weird to me. And they kind of had to, right? They had 2 first-round picks and not a lot of wiggle room under the cap. Like, you have to have cheap contributors at some point. It looks strange in retrospect. And then they've nailed it ever since. They've just totally nailed it ever since February 2022. When they traded away Sabonis for Haliburton, and they traded away LeVert for a great package that got them Nembhard, and they did everything. They couldn't trade Brogdon, but they did everything well there. They got Jalen Smith for Torrey Craig. They have just completely nailed it to me since then, right? Since they started to rebuild and talked about their long-term thinking and how they've changed their approach and all that, they have just been all over it, right? 2022, they trade Brogdon for the Nesmith-Tice package, right? Here's who they lost in 2022, outside of the Brogdon trade. They lost TJ Warren, who hasn't been the same player ever since. Dwayne Washington, who hasn't touched an NBA floor ever since. Gabe York, who hasn't touched an NBA floor ever since. Lance, who hasn't touched an NBA floor ever since. And Ricky Rubio, who did for a second. And Nate Hinton, right? That's fine. They're happy with that. They got Kendall Brown in the draft. James Johnson, still on the team. Ben Mathurin, still on the team. Andrew Nembhard, still on the team. Aaron Nesmith, still on the team. Daniel Tice, who's salary filler. And Trevelyan Queen, who was good, but didn't stick. And they re-signed Jalen Smith. Banger summer. Like, you get a lot of long-term pieces and lose nothing. That's incredible. That's exactly what you want to have happen. And now they're clearly on a rebuilding path. They're pretty good. They win 37 games. What do you do now? Let's add some winning pieces. Let's bring in Bruce Brown. Let's bring in Obi Toppin. That summer they lost George Hill, Gabe York, O'Shea Brissett, which I was kind of like, what was that? But that is going to work out, it looks like. And they had to trade Chris Duarte, which that makes that pick not look as good. They got Toppin in the spot. They had to make draft picks. So this summer was kind of weird to me, where they did some rebuildy stuff with drafting Jarrison Shepard, but some win now stuff with Obi and Bruce Brown. But it turns out that they weren't really doing rebuilding stuff. Jarris didn't play. They played the vets. They went for win now moves, and it worked. They extended Haliburton and Nesmith on incredible contracts. And now we're here, right? Everybody knows what happened this summer. I'm not going to rehash the summer that just happened, right? Clearly adding all they could in terms of getting youth in to the spot that they lost guys. So Furphy and Wiseman, and for Smith and McDermott. And now they go, right? Now they go. Doug McDermott's still not on a team. So Jalen Smith, their only player in a rotation from last year, who has joined somewhere else. And they just extended and re-signed everybody. We'll see what that ends up looking like. This is the most continuity-focused summer they've ever had. They had some before in the Brogdon Sabonis eras, but this one really topples it. But that's where we are today. So they had a really weird stretch from 2020 to 2022 where they had coaching turnover. The cap growth really hurt them because of what happened with the signings they made in 2019. And then 2018, the Tyreek Evans signing, their most major move at the time, did not work. So what can we take away from this exercise of just going through what Pritchard has done, right? I think, to me, there's summers that look the worst in retrospect has always been, and this is something I always talk about, and something that the Pacers have mostly been good at, is you have to go in one direction with every move you make. It's really awkward, and you have off seasons where some moves are about young talent and draft picks and playing for the future. And some other moves are about, let's win some games right now, right? And other teams have this problem all the time where they try to do a little bit of both, right? Oh, we can what if we trade away this guy for a first, but we try to sign? Like, it just doesn't work. You lose continuity, you lose talent, and maybe you are the same level of team. Like, is that what you want? The Warriors famously tried to do 2 timelines for forever. When they won a title, they committed to 1 timeline, and now they're in trouble because their young guys aren't as good as they thought, or they're giving them up for less, right? It's just so hard to actually do that. When they committed in 2017 to trying to win with what they got from the Paul George trade and what they already had, they made winning moves. That team turned out to be pretty good. They tried to build around that team, and they got a team with a really high ceiling that was doing good stuff. A lot of stuff got in their way, including a pandemic and injuries, but it worked, right? That was good. But in 2021, or really when they were making coaching changes and trying to win, but also couldn't make any winning moves on the roster, it didn't look as good. When they tried to toe that line in the draft and with their additions, it didn't work as well. It's hard to say what their worst summer was because they haven't had any truly awful ones where it didn't make any sense. What are they doing? It didn't make any sense. Right? They haven't had that, right? So I can't even really say it. It probably would have to be somewhere between 2020 and 2022, pre-Haliburton trade, I guess, what you'd call their worst from a roster perspective only. But they've all been, at least with the benefit of hindsight, which is not fair, like, they make sense. As long as they do what they set out to do and stay on that path, they have done a pretty good job. This team's been a largely consistent winner outside of 2 years since I've been covering the team, which just happens to coincide with when Pritchard got promoted. When they didn't have a lot to do, they made coaching changes. Okay. So the other takeaway from this is the draft from 2017 to 2020 really was painful for them, right? Who knows what that era, I keep saying era, like this 2-year stretch of NBA time is an era. It's not. But if they hit any one of Leaf, Holiday, Bitadze, and they hit Sumner, right? He turned out to be something. Alze was a rotation player every once in a while. And Aaron Holiday's I'm like different. I have different thinking on the draft than most people. I think Aaron Holiday at 23, given what his career's been, is like, that's fine, right? That's kind of what you expect to get value-wise out of a 23rd pick. They've been better since, right? Duarte didn't stick, but was great that first year. They got some value for him. They don't want to get 2 seconds for the 13th pick. That you call that an underwater pick for sure, but didn't stink. Isaiah Jackson's a good pick. I think Mathurin's a good pick. We'll see. I think Jarris is a good pick. Nemhard's an amazing pick, right? They've gotten way, I don't know if they've changed their process or what, but their drafting has been awesome in this specific decade that we're in right now. Their talent, their ability to identify and acquire young talent on other teams that is not playing as much as they should or whatever. Toppin, Nesmith, Haliburton, Smith, I'm probably missing some, has been ridiculously good. That's probably their best skill as a front office. They're good at getting young talent. It's already in the NBA. The draft has been, especially early in their tenure, was strange. The Nate Bjorkgren year was really strange. But a lot of the stuff that got in their way was the pandemic, changing the cap at a very terrible time for that to happen, and just betting that they could do well with injury history players. It didn't work. The vision made sense. Part of the reason they were able to afford all those guys at the same time was because of that. They skated through it. I, again, thought all those moves made sense at the time. They very rarely have done something that at the time I'm kind of like, what? That doesn't, unironically, the Depot trade is one of the biggest things they've done that I did not understand at all at the time they did it. I have had some draft picks I quibbled with along the way, but that has not happened as much recently either. So just, I think a lot like this front office thinks in terms of team building. I think they've largely done a pretty good job. And going through this exercise before I actually sat down to record this made me feel even better about that thinking. They had a weird little hiccup that was caused by some stuff that was not totally in their control. Some of it kind of was. And now they're here. And now they are tasked with doing what they tried to do in 2019 and 2017. They had a good team, make it better, right? 2019, they looked like they were doing a good job until injuries really ripped that up. In 2017, they did a good job until a Victor Oladipo injury kind of ripped that up, and their marquee signing, Tyrese Evans, didn't work out. Can they do better this time? What did they learn from that before? Well, that'll kind of come to a head in the next 18 months to me, between the tax thinking they're going to have, between the moves they're going to have to make to build around this Tyrese Haliburton-led team. This could be the highest ceiling team that this front office has ever had. What do they do around it? I think they've learned the right lessons. Can they do the right things? Can they get another, like the Siakam trade is already something we've never seen them do before. What do they do now? How do they get this figured out? That is what we'll find out about Kevin Pritchard and co. in the next 18 months. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Look back and learned something valuable. That's what September and August podcasts about the NBA are all about. We're getting so close to stuff returning for Pacers Hoops. So close. 2 or 3 weeks. Can't wait. This week on this show, guests TBD. Haven't asked anybody yet, but I want to talk about what it would take for the Pacers to win a title, with their current stuff in the mix, what Pacers could be in the mix for awards. The best center seasons episode will come this week, and I really don't know what my fifth one will be. And then next week will be a little bit of similar, what are we going to talk about? So if you have ideas, let me know. I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys think is interesting, relevant, or whatever for the off season. Thank you guys for tuning in today. Again, apologies for this coming out later, but if I recorded this last night, it would have been terrible. Hope you have a wonderful Monday. We'll see you in 14 hours. See you tomorrow.